because yesterday we had the Labour manifesto unveiled by Sir Keir Starmer up in Manchester. They say that they're going to crack the gangs. That's going to be their policy. But let's talk to Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration, to see whether or not actually the Labour Party have got a clue about what to do. Robert, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks very much indeed. I'm looking at the sort of summation of the Labour manifesto on the small boats. They say they're committing the party to cutting net migration, which, of course, as we know, stood at just under 700,000 at the end of last year. On the small boats, Labour will scrap the Rwanda policy and use 75 million earmarked for the scheme to set up a new border security command to target the gangs who facilitate illegal migration. They also say they're going to try and return migrants to the European Union. It doesn't sound particularly revolutionary to me.
No, and I imagine their spin department was very, very proud of the border control. It sounds very stern, doesn't it? It sounds very action being taken with clamping down on the problem. But what we'll actually find is that this becomes, as with so many things in the in Whitehall and in the public sector, becomes a bloated monolith that ultimately ends up doing the absolute inverse of what it intends to do. At the moment, obviously, they're pitching it as if it will somehow lead to an expedition of people that have entered the country illegally. But what will actually happen ultimately is these people end up as caseworkers, fostering the case of those people to come into the country illegally, and we'll find the modern slavery rules that were put in place under Theresa May stretched and stretched and stretched. I think the priority on the gangs is actually going to lead to this becoming an issue of sympathy and emotion, and rather than cold hard reason, that we can't simply be allowing tens of thousands of young men to cross the channel every single year.
Right, and the problem, of course, as well for the Labour Party is if they do get a massive majority, a super majority, some people are calling it, they will still have a problem within their own party, because there are lots of people in the Labour Party who don't think that anybody should be cracking down on immigration, because they just think everybody coming here is a good thing.
Well, that's it. And let's not forget, during this election campaign, the 50 or so Labour MPs who were backing a resettlement scheme for Palestinians. So the default of the Labour Party is open borders. Let's be absolutely clear about that. And I've been like you. I've not quite summoned the strength to read through the absolute fine tooth comb kind of necessary to understand the Labour policy. But I've read the summaries, and it's wishy-washiness. They've essentially tried to smoke and mirrors over the divisions within their party in the hope that they'll be able to stagger into number 10 by default. And then at that point, they've got the mandate, and they'll let it rip. Honestly, they will let it rip. It's terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not much prospect really of anything changing. I suppose the only hope that some people might have is that in the European Union things might take a turn simply because of the way that the elections for the European Union parties changed over the weekend and on Sunday, where it looks like more right-wing parties are going to have a bit more power, so they could have an effect on EU policy, right?
Well, I'd actually be concerned that the fact that Europe seems to be waking up to the migration crisis is putting us in a perilous position, because we're going to have a soft-touch government who don't seem to realise the pressures that do come with when it comes to legal migration, pressure to come on public services, and then when it comes to illegal, the massive security threats that are accompanied. So I think ultimately we're left more exposed by the events in Europe over the last couple of weeks, and it's terrifying that as the rest of the Western world, the Europe and America seem to be gripping the problems that are caused by these huge flows, these unprecedented flows of people. And we are in the age of mass migration now, and the Western world is still trying to grapple with that. But we seem to be lurching in the other direction. We seem to be on the brink of electing a party that will refuse to put a cap on the number of people that come into the country, and ultimately, actually, when it comes to legal migration, be outsourcing policy making to an unelected quango that no one's ever heard of, and the people whom are making the decisions are completely remote from the electorate.
Well, let's have a look at what was said last night. The ITV debate, of course, between 7 candidates, including Nigel Farage, Angela Rayner, Penny Mordaunt, and, of course, Stephen Flynn from the SNP. Let's see what they said about it.
Please raise your hand if you think the net level of legal migration, that is the additional number of people coming to the country to work and live, needs to fall. Please raise your hand. The number needs to fall.
What a sorry
Nigel
reflection.
Farage, Penny Mordaunt.
It's due to fall anyway.
Daisy Cooper, Angela Rayner.
The
Thank you very
Westminster
much.
status quo. That's exactly. That's the Westminster status quo. Of course it is. The four main parties.
No, it isn't.
The four main parties all with the exact
I welcome immigration.
Stephen Flynn there, obviously bucking the trend. Stephen Flynn is one of those, isn't he, I think, Robert, who wants unbridled immigration, basically.
Yeah, well, we can. He's an irrelevance in this election anyway. The SNP are, recovering barely from the inner turmoil that's enveloped them for the last couple of years. Yeah. So I don't think we need to take what he says too seriously. I think that the idea of a coalition of chaos with the SNP and Labour is off the table, thankfully. But I mean, the idea of Labour standing there and raising their hand saying mass migration is too high. I think you'd have to be an absolute moron to think that 675,000 net is in any way acceptable. The problem is both Labour and the Conservative Party have failed to say actually what they think is an acceptable level. I mean, 400,000 would still be a huge number, but it's still lower than 675,000. So we need to know the parties, and there is only ultimately one party at the moment that does seem to be speaking about what level they would want to see net migration running at. The other two have given themselves so much leeway as to be meaningless, and the pledges that they're putting forward to be about as trustworthy as, well, any other election pledge that we've seen over the last few cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Tories, of course, would say today that there's evidence from figures that have just come in that the number of sort of legal migrants is coming down because they've started to limit the ability of people to come here with dependents. But it's all a bit too little too late, isn't it?
Well, it is, and of course the number will come down. You racket it up that high, it's inevitable that it will fall to some extent. But let's not forget that the number that the Tories have admitted that they're kind of happy to settle at, for the status quo to settle at, of about 350, 400,000, is still fourfold higher than what it was under Tony Blair, essentially. So the Conservative Party have come in and they've made a real hash of the migration system, and they've tinkered with bits here and they've introduced new measures there, and what they've left us with as a country is an absolute mess of a system that has loopholes, backdoors to entry, visa scams essentially, universities that are running amok, a private sector that is essentially able to issue visas, like throw them around like they were confetti. So I think the Conservative Party have a lot to answer for this in this election, but unfortunately the Labour Party will be worse.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Robert Bates, Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control.